I never thought a piece of paper stuck to my logging truck would cost the Shadow Pine Mountain HOA their only road access to civilization. But here we are. My name is Owen Quill, and I run a small, independent logging operation in the mountains of western Montana, about 40 miles northeast of Missoula. I have been doing this work for 15 years, ever since my father passed and left me the business along with 120 acres of prime timberland. The property sits in a peculiar position geographically. It is bordered on 3 sides by national forest land, and on the 4th side by a private mountain community called Shadow Pine Estates. The thing is, my land serves as the only practical access route between Shadow Pine Estates and the main county highway. There is technically another way out, but it involves a treacherous 12-mile detour around the mountain on an unmaintained fire road that becomes impassable for 6 months of the year. When the developers built Shadow Pine Estates back in the 80s, my father negotiated an easement allowing residents to use our main logging road to reach the highway. It was a fair deal. They maintained half the road, we maintained the other half, and everyone got along just fine. The residents got reliable year-round access to town, and we got help keeping the road in decent shape without bearing the full cost ourselves. This arrangement worked beautifully for decades. The original residents were mostly retired folks who valued peace and quiet. They appreciated living in genuine timber country and understood that logging operations were part of mountain life. I knew most of them by name. Bill Henderson would wave from his pickup every time he passed. Martha Donnelly always brought me apple pie at Christmas. We were neighbors in the true sense of the word. Then things started changing about 3 years ago. The original residents began selling their properties and moving into assisted living facilities or closer to their kids. The new buyers were different. They were wealthy tech workers from Seattle and California who could work remotely and wanted a mountain escape. Nothing wrong with that in principle, but they brought city expectations to country living. The Shadow Pine Estates HOA reformed under new leadership about 18 months ago. The president was a woman named Brenda Garrison, a former software project manager from Redmond who had relocated during the pandemic. Brenda was 52 years old with an angular blonde bob haircut that looked like it required weekly salon maintenance, which seemed impractical considering the nearest proper salon was 40 minutes away. She wore designer athleisure outfits even in winter and drove a white BMW X5 that seemed comically out of place on dirt roads. The first sign of trouble came last spring, when I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was 6 pages long and written in the most pompous legal language I had ever seen outside an actual courtroom. The essence of it was that the HOA wanted to renegotiate the terms of the easement agreement to better reflect current community standards and property values. I called the number on the letterhead and got Brenda herself. "Hi, this is Owen Quill returning your letter about the easement. I am a bit confused about what exactly you want to change." Her voice had that particular quality of someone used to being the smartest person in every meeting. "Owen, hi. Thanks for calling back. The board and I have reviewed the existing easement agreement, and frankly, it is extremely outdated. It was written in 1987. The community has evolved significantly since then." "Sure, but the basic situation has not changed. You need access to the highway, and the road crosses my property. What specifically are you concerned about?" "Well, for starters, there are no provisions regarding noise ordinances. Your logging trucks start at absolutely ungodly hours. Residents have complained about being woken at 6 in the morning. I kept my voice level. The easement does not have time restrictions because logging is a working business that operates during daylight hours. 6 a.m. is a normal start time for this kind of work. Also, we only run active operations a few months out of the year during harvest season. Be that as it may, residents have a reasonable expectation of peace and quiet. We are proposing operational hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays only. I actually laughed. Brenda, that is not how logging works. Weather dictates our schedule. When we have a clear day during harvest season, we need to use it. Besides, the easement agreement does not give you authority to regulate my business operations. We are also concerned about road wear and tear. Those massive trucks are destroying a road that our homeowners use. We are proposing a road impact fee of $5,000 per month during active harvest periods. Now, I was getting annoyed. Again, the existing agreement already addresses maintenance responsibilities. We split costs 50-50. I have the invoices to prove we have held up our end. And for the record, we grade and maintain our section more regularly than you maintain yours. The conversation went downhill from there. Brenda insisted the HOA had a right to update the agreement. I insisted they had no such right without my consent, which I was not giving. We ended the call with nothing resolved. Over the next few months, things escalated in small ways. Brenda started showing up at my property unannounced to discuss concerns. I was polite but firm that she needed to call ahead. Then she started taking photos of my equipment, my lumber staging areas, everything. I would see her white BMW parked on the road shoulder while she documented things on her phone. The HOA sent more letters, each more demanding than the last. They wanted environmental impact studies. They wanted proof of insurance beyond what was legally required. They wanted me to post a bond against potential road damage. I ignored most of it. My lawyer, a gruff guy named Pete Morrison who had an office in Missoula, reviewed everything and confirmed I was on solid legal ground. They are just trying to bully you into renegotiating, Pete told me over coffee in September. The original easement is ironclad. Your father and the original developer did it right. As long as you are not violating any actual county or state regulations, they cannot touch you. That should have been the end of it, but Brenda was not the type to accept being told no. October arrived, which meant it was time for our fall harvest. I have a sustainable forestry plan approved by the state. We selectively harvest mature trees on a rotation that keeps the forest healthy while providing steady income. It is careful, responsible work that my grandfather started and my father continued. This year we were harvesting from the northern section of our property, which required bringing in some additional equipment. I contracted with a crew from Kalispell that I had worked with before. Good people, experienced professionals. We brought in 2 feller bunchers, a logging truck, a skidder, and the usual assortment of support equipment. Total value of equipment on site was probably pushing $500,000. The work began on a Monday morning in mid-October. The weather was crisp and clear, perfect conditions. My crew was efficient and careful. We were cutting, delimbing, and staging logs for transport. The plan was to have everything processed and hauled to the mill in Missoula within 3 weeks. On the Wednesday of our first week, I drove into town to pick up some supplies and grab lunch. When I returned around 2 in the afternoon, I immediately knew something was wrong. Several pieces of equipment were missing from the staging area. The feller buncher was still there because it was actively being used, but the backup skidder and my personal logging truck were gone. My foreman, a guy named Rick Paulson who had been in the business longer than I had been alive, was standing in the middle of the staging area looking absolutely livid. "Boss, you are not going to believe this," he said when I jumped out of my pickup. "Where is our equipment, towed?" About an hour ago, 2 flatbed tow trucks came in with a county sheriff deputy as escort. "What? On what grounds?" Rick handed me a neon orange sticker, the kind tow companies put on vehicles. "This was on your truck. The others had the same thing." I read the sticker. It cited county code for illegally parked vehicles blocking a private road. There was a case number and the name of the towing company, Big Sky Towing out of Missoula. This is insane. The equipment is parked on my property, on the staging area we have used for years. Who called for the tow? The deputy mentioned an HOA complaint, said they got a call that abandoned vehicles were blocking emergency access. I felt my blood pressure rising. These are not abandoned vehicles. This is active work equipment on private property during a scheduled harvest operation. And we are not blocking anything. The road is completely clear. Rick nodded. I tried explaining that to the deputy, but he said he was just providing escort for the tow company, told us to take it up with whoever requested the tow. I immediately called Big Sky Towing. The woman who answered was polite, but unhelpful. "Sir, we were contracted by the Shadow Pine Estates HOA to remove vehicles in violation of their community regulations. You will need to contact them or come to our lot with proof of ownership and pay the impound fees to retrieve your property." "How much are the impound fees?" "Let me see. We have 3 vehicles. That is $350 per vehicle for the tow, plus $85 per day storage. Total right now is $1,050, but that will go up $85 per vehicle per day." I was too angry to argue with her. She was just doing her job. The HOA was the problem. I hung up and immediately called Brenda. She answered on the 3rd ring and I could hear the smugness in her voice. "Owen, I was expecting your call. You had my equipment towed from my own property." I had improperly stored vehicles removed from a shared access road per county regulations and HOA authority. There is a difference. My equipment was not on the shared road. It was on my staging area, which is fully on my property, at least 50 feet from the easement. That is not what our site inspection indicated. We have photos clearly showing your vehicles encroaching on the easement and creating a safety hazard. I knew she was lying, but proving it would take time I did not have. "Brenda, this is my business equipment during an active harvest. You just cost me a day of work and over $1,000 in fees. Perhaps next time you will be more considerate about where you park. The easement agreement gives the HOA authority to maintain safe access. It absolutely does not give you authority to tow equipment from my property. You have crossed a line here. I have done what is necessary to protect homeowner interests. If you feel we have acted improperly, you are welcome to pursue legal remedies. In the meantime, I suggest you retrieve your vehicles and ensure they are properly positioned going forward." "Have a good day, Owen." She hung up on me. I stood there for a moment, shaking with anger. Rick was watching me carefully. "What do you want to do, boss?" I took a deep breath and forced myself to think. Going off half-cocked would not help. "Get everyone together. We are shutting down for the day while I sort this out." I drove straight to Pete Morrison's office in Missoula. He listened to the whole story while taking notes, his expression growing darker by the minute. "This is harassment, plain and simple," Pete said. "She is using the towing laws improperly to interfere with your business. We can fight it, but it is going to take time. You want me to file an emergency motion. How long for that? I could have something in front of a judge by Monday, maybe Tuesday. That is almost a week. We are in the middle of harvest. Every day counts with weather this time of year." Pete nodded. "I understand, but there is not a faster option unless you want to just pay the fees and get your equipment back." I thought about it. Paying the fees would get us back to work immediately, but it would also signal to Brenda that she could keep pulling this kind of stunt. On the other hand, losing a week of harvest time would cost me way more than $1,000. Let me think about it overnight. In the meantime, can you send a letter to the HOA stating that they acted improperly and demanding they cover the towing fees? Absolutely. I will have it drafted and sent today. I left Pete's office and drove to the Big Sky towing lot. It was one of those fenced compounds full of impounded cars in various states of distress. The woman at the front desk was the same one I had spoken to on the phone. I provided proof of ownership for all 3 pieces of equipment and wrote a check for the impound fees, which had already increased by another day's storage charge. By the time I got the equipment retrieved and back to the property, it was almost 6 p.m., too late to resume work. I sent the crew home and told them to report back in the morning. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Brenda's smug voice on the phone. She had deliberately sabotaged my harvest, cost me money, and seemed to think she could get away with it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got, but underneath the anger was something else. A realization forming. The Shadow Pine Estates HOA needed that easement across my property. Without it, their community was effectively landlocked except for that barely maintained fire road. The easement was a privilege I granted them, not a right they owned. Yes, there was a legal agreement, but easements could be terminated under certain circumstances. And if the HOA was going to weaponize technicalities and county regulations against me, maybe it was time I looked at what options I had. The next morning, before heading to the work site, I called Pete again. I need you to research something for me. What are the legal grounds for terminating an easement? Owen, that is a nuclear option. Are you sure you want to go there? Just tell me what the grounds are. I heard papers rustling. Okay, in Montana, easements can be terminated for several reasons. Abandonment, if the dominant estate no longer uses it for an extended period. Merger, if the same person acquires both properties. End of necessity, if the original purpose no longer exists, and there is also termination for misuse. If the easement holder uses the easement in a way that exceeds the scope of the grant or damages the servient estate, the grantor can petition for termination. Tell me more about misuse. Basically, if they are using the easement for purposes beyond what the original agreement specified, or if they are causing damage to your property through their use, you can argue the easement should be terminated. But Owen, you would need to prove significant misuse. A judge is not going to terminate an easement that provides sole access to a community lightly. What if the HOA is using the easement to harass me and interfere with my legal business operations? There was a long pause. That is an interesting angle. You would be arguing that their misuse is not about the physical road itself, but about how they are weaponizing their access rights. It is novel. I have never seen it tried, but there is possible merit there. Start researching it seriously. I want to know if we have a case. Owen, even if you could win that argument, you would be cutting off road access to dozens of homes. That is going to make you very unpopular. Right now, I do not care about being popular. They came after my livelihood. I am going to make sure they understand the position they are in. I hung up and headed to the work site. The crew was ready to go, and we had a productive day. No further interference from the HOA. But I noticed Brenda's white BMW cruising past several times, always slowing down as she drove by, always with her phone out taking photos or video. Over the next week, work progressed well. We were making good time on the harvest. Then on Wednesday, exactly 1 week after the first towing incident, it happened again. I was on site this time, watching the feller buncher work, when two tow trucks rolled up with a sheriff deputy in escort. I walked directly to the deputy, a young guy named Collins I had not dealt with before. "Deputy, what is this about?" He looked uncomfortable. "Sir, we have a complaint from the Shadow Pine Estates HOA about illegally parked vehicles blocking the access road. I am here to ensure the tow company can safely remove the vehicles." "Deputy Collins, those vehicles are legally parked on my private property during an authorized logging operation. The HOA has no authority to have them towed." "Sir, I am just here to prevent a breach of peace. The tow company has an order from the HOA. You will need to dispute this with them or through the courts. This is the second time this has happened. It is harassment and you are enabling it." His jaw tightened. "Sir, I am going to need you to step back and let the tow operators do their job." I wanted to argue more, but I could see it was pointless. Just like last time, the deputy was just following procedure. The problem was Brenda and the HOA. I stepped back and called Pete while watching them load my skidder onto a flatbed. It happened again. Same thing. "They are towing equipment right now." "Are you serious?" "Okay, this is definitely harassment now. I am filing an emergency motion today. We need to get in front of a judge immediately." "Do it." "And Pete, I am serious about exploring termination of the easement." "They want to play hardball, we will play hardball." After the tow trucks left, I gathered my crew. Rick and the others looked frustrated and confused. "What is going on, Owen? Why do they keep doing this?" "The HOA president is trying to force me to renegotiate the easement agreement on terms favorable to them. She thinks she can bully me into it." "That is insane. Can she just keep towing our stuff?" "Not legally, no. We are fighting it. But in the meantime, I need to make a decision about whether we continue this harvest or shut down until the legal situation is resolved." Rick frowned. "Boss, shutting down would cost us big time. We have contracts with the mill. We have already cut a bunch of timber that needs to be hauled out." "I know. Let me think about this." I spent the rest of the day weighing options. Every option seemed bad. If I kept working, the HOA would probably just keep towing equipment, costing me time and money. If I shut down, I would lose money on delayed contracts and risk having cut timber sit too long. But there was a third option forming in my mind, a more aggressive approach. That evening, I drove into Shadow Pine Estates to have a face-to-face conversation with Brenda. I needed to make her understand what she was risking. The community was beautiful. I had to admit that. Expensive homes tucked into the pine forest, well-maintained roads, fancy landscaping. These were people with money who had bought into a mountain lifestyle. I found Brenda's house easily enough. It was one of the larger properties, a modern mountain contemporary design with huge windows and a 3-car garage. Her white BMW was parked in the driveway. I knocked on the front door. She opened it wearing yoga pants and a fleece pullover, holding a glass of white wine. Her expression shifted from surprise to annoyance when she saw me. "Owen, I was not expecting you. We need to talk. Can I come in?" "I do not think that is appropriate. Whatever you need to say can be said through lawyers." "Brenda, you have now cost me over $2,000 in towing fees and at least 2 days of work. You are interfering with a legitimate business operation using false pretenses. I am protecting homeowner interests, which is my responsibility as HOA president." "No, you are harassing me because I would not agree to renegotiate an easement agreement that is completely fair and legal as it stands." She took a sip of wine. "Owen, you seem to think you have all the power here because the road crosses your property, but you are wrong. The easement is a legal document. We have rights to that access, and we will enforce those rights. And I have rights to run my business without interference. You are abusing your position. If you feel that way, sue us. Until then, I will continue doing what I believe is best for this community. Now, I am going to ask you to leave my property." I felt my temper rising but kept my voice calm. "Before I go, I want you to consider something. That easement exists because my family agreed to it. It is a privilege we extended. If your HOA keeps interfering with my business, I will start exploring options to terminate it." For the first time, Brenda looked uncertain. "You cannot terminate an easement just because you are upset. It is a legal agreement. Easements can be terminated for misuse." "Keep pushing me, and you will find out just how serious I am. Your entire community depends on that road access. Maybe think about that before you tow my equipment again." I turned and walked back to my truck before she could respond. As I drove away, I saw her on her phone, probably calling her lawyer or the HOA board. Good. Let them worry for a change. Pete called me the next morning. "I have good news and bad news. The good news is I got us a hearing in front of Judge Matthews for Monday morning. The bad news is that is still 4 days away." "What are we asking for?" "An injunction preventing the HOA from further interference with your logging operations, and a ruling that their previous towing actions were improper. If we get that, you can also sue for damages." "And the easement termination angle?" "I am researching it, but Owen, I have to be honest. It is a long shot. Terminating an easement that provides sole practical access is extremely difficult. Judges really do not like leaving communities landlocked. Even if the HOA is abusing their access rights, even then, you would need to prove serious, sustained misuse that goes beyond a couple of towing incidents." I thought about that. What if we did not ask for full termination? What if we asked for suspension of the easement pending the HOA's good behavior? There was silence on the other end of the line. That is creative. Basically, you would be asking the court to use suspension as leverage to stop the harassment. I like it. Let me see if I can build a legal framework for that argument. On Friday morning, I made a decision. I called Rick and told him to suspend operations. We would not resume until after Monday's hearing. I was not going to keep playing whack-a-mole with HOA towing while waiting for the court to intervene. Rick was not happy. "Boss, we are losing money every day we sit idle." "I know, but they will just keep towing equipment. We pause now, get the legal situation settled, then resume. It is the only way." After informing the crew, I drove to the staging area and used my own equipment to reposition everything clearly onto my property, well away from any possible boundary dispute with the easement. I took detailed photos and even measured distances from the road. If the HOA tried to claim we were encroaching, I now had solid proof otherwise. Then I did something that felt both petty and satisfying. I parked my personal pickup truck across the logging road at the property line, completely blocking access between Shadow Pine Estates and the highway. The easement gave them right of access, but it did not specify I had to keep the road clear if I was not actively using it for logging operations. My phone rang within 30 minutes. It was Brenda, and she sounded furious. "What do you think you are doing? You have a truck blocking the road." "I am securing my property while logging operations are suspended. You cannot block the easement. Residents need access to the highway. The easement allows you to use the road for access. It does not prevent me from using my own property. If you want the truck moved, come to the hearing on Monday." "This is outrageous. I am calling the sheriff. Go ahead. I am not violating any laws, but think carefully, Brenda. If you keep escalating this, you are not going to like where it ends." I hung up on her this time. Over the weekend, I received 3 more calls from Brenda. 2 calls from other HOA board members and 1 visit from Deputy Collins, who looked even more uncomfortable than before. "Mr. Quill, I am getting complaints that you are blocking a legal easement." "Deputy, I have a truck parked on my own property. I am not blocking anything permanently. Logging operations are temporarily suspended due to HOA harassment. Once that is resolved, operations will resume and the road will be clear." "Sir, people need to get to work, to town, to the hospital potentially. They have another access route via the fire road. It is not my fault they chose to live in a location with limited access options. The easement is a privilege, not a mandate that I keep the road clear 24/7 regardless of whether I am using it." Deputy Collins shook his head. "This is above my pay grade. You folks need to work this out in court. But I am telling you, if someone has a medical emergency and cannot get out, there could be serious consequences. Then I suggest the HOA stop harassing me so we can get back to normal operations. I am not the one who escalated this situation." He left, and I felt a twinge of guilt. I did not actually want to hurt innocent residents who had nothing to do with Brenda's power trip, but I also needed to make it crystal clear what the stakes were. The HOA had leverage over me through their harassment. Now, I had leverage over them through access control. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. I put on my best button-down shirt and a blazer I usually only wore to funerals and drove to the courthouse in Missoula. Pete was waiting outside, wearing an actual suit and carrying a leather briefcase full of documents. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Nervous. I have never done anything like this before. Just be straightforward and honest. Judge Matthews is fair. She'll listen to the facts." The hearing was in a small courtroom on the 2nd floor. The Shadow Pine Estates HOA was represented by a lawyer named Gregory Pierce, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who probably charged more per hour than I made in a day. Brenda sat behind him with 2 other HOA board members, a man and a woman I did not recognize. Judge Matthews was a woman in her early 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes. She called the hearing to order and asked Pete to present our case. Pete stood and laid out the situation clearly and methodically. The original easement agreement. My family's logging business and the current harvest operation. The 2 incidents where the HOA had equipment towed under false pretenses. The financial harm caused by the towings and the delay in operations. Your Honor, this is a clear case of harassment, Pete concluded. The HOA is abusing county towing regulations to interfere with a legitimate business operation in retaliation for Mr. Quill refusing to renegotiate an easement agreement that is fair and legal as written. We are asking for an injunction preventing further interference and a ruling that the previous towings were improper. Judge Matthews looked at the HOA's lawyer. "Mr. Pierce, your response." Gregory Pierce stood smoothly. "Your Honor, the Shadow Pine Estates HOA has a responsibility to protect the safety and property values of its residents. Mr. Quill's logging operations are conducted in a manner that creates hazards and disruptions. The vehicles that were towed were in fact encroaching on the easement area, and photographic evidence supports this. The HOA acted within its rights to maintain safe access." Pete immediately objected. "Your Honor, I have photographs taken by Mr. Quill showing that all equipment was positioned well within his property lines, at least 50 feet from the easement boundary. The HOA's photos appear to use angles and perspectives that create a false impression of encroachment." Judge Matthews raised a hand. "I will review the photographic evidence from both sides. Mr. Pierce, what about the claim that this is retaliation for Mr. Quill refusing to renegotiate the easement?" "Your Honor, The HOA's desire to update an outdated agreement is completely separate from enforcement of safety regulations. Any suggestion of retaliation is speculative and unfounded. Except, Pete interjected, the HOA sent multiple letters demanding renegotiation over a period of months. Mr. Quill refused. Within weeks of his final refusal, the first towing incident occurred. Then, exactly 1 week later, a second towing occurred. The pattern suggests coordination and intentionality, not legitimate safety concerns. Judge Matthews reviewed documents for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked up. I am going to issue a temporary injunction preventing the Shadow Pine Estates, HOA, from having any equipment or vehicles towed from Mr. Quill's property. Unless there is an immediate and documented safety hazard verified by county officials independent of HOA requests. This injunction will remain in effect pending a full hearing on the merits, which I am scheduling for 3 weeks from today. Brenda looked like she wanted to explode, but Gregory Pierce put a hand on her arm to keep her quiet. However, Judge Matthews continued, looking at me, Mr. Quill, I understand you currently have a vehicle blocking the easement road. Is that correct? I stood. Yes, Your Honor. I parked my truck there after suspending logging operations due to the HOA's harassment. I needed to secure my property. I understand your frustration, but you cannot block a legal easement indefinitely. You have 48 hours to remove the vehicle and restore normal access. If you fail to do so, the HOA can petition for enforcement, and I will grant it. Am I clear? Yes, Your Honor. Good. This hearing is adjourned. I expect all parties to behave like adults until the full hearing. We filed out of the courtroom. Pete looked pleased. That went well. The temporary injunction protects you from further towing, and the judge clearly sees merit in our harassment claim. But she is making me move the truck. Of course she is. You cannot actually block the easement long term, but you made your point. The HOA knows you have leverage now. Outside the courthouse, Brenda intercepted me before I could reach my truck. Her face was red with anger. You think you won something in there, but you did not. We will prove those vehicles were blocking the easement, and you will lose the full hearing. Brenda, when are you going to realize you cannot win this? The easement agreement is fair. My business is legal. You are wasting HOA money on lawyers to fight a battle you started for no good reason. You are ruining our community with your noise and your trucks and your whole backwoods operation. Property values are suffering because people do not want to live next to a logging operation. Then maybe they should not have bought property next to timberland. I have been here my entire life. My family has been here for 3 generations. You moved here 2 years ago and decided everything should change to suit you. Gregory Pierce appeared and put himself between us. That is enough. Brenda, let us go. Owen, stay away from my client. They walked away, Brenda still fuming. I felt exhausted. This kind of conflict was not in my nature, but I was not going to back down. I moved my truck that afternoon, restoring access to Shadow Pine Estates. The next morning, I resumed logging operations. The crew was relieved to get back to work, and over the next 2 weeks, we made excellent progress. No towing trucks appeared. Brenda's white BMW still cruised past occasionally, but from a distance. She was watching and waiting for me to make a mistake. I did not give her the opportunity. Every piece of equipment was meticulously positioned. I documented everything with photos and measurements. I kept detailed logs of our work hours, activities, and any interactions with HOA residents. Most of the residents, I discovered, were not actually on board with Brenda's crusade. I had a conversation with a guy named Paul Hendricks who lived near the entrance to Shadow Pine Estates. He stopped while I was loading logs one morning. Owen, I just want you to know that not all of us support what Brenda is doing. Some of us think she is way out of line. I appreciate that, Paul. I have nothing against you or most of the residents. This is between me and the HOA board. I tried to bring it up at the last board meeting. Asked why we are spending HOA funds on lawyers to fight you when the existing easement seems to be working fine. Brenda shut me down, said it was not up for discussion. You ever considered running for the board yourself? Paul laughed. I do not have the temperament for it, but there are others who are getting fed up. If this keeps going, there might be a push to remove Brenda as president. That was interesting information. If Brenda lost internal support, the whole situation might resolve itself. But I could not count on that. The full hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in early November. By then, we had completed the harvest and had most of the logs hauled to the mill. The timing was good because the weather was starting to turn. We would have been wrapping up anyway. The night before the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing everything with Pete. He had prepared a comprehensive case with photos, timeline documentation, copies of all correspondence, and even statements from some of my crew about the impact of the towing incidents. The key is going to be establishing the pattern of harassment, Pete explained. We need Judge Matthews to see that the HOA's actions were not legitimate safety enforcement but targeted retaliation. What are our chances? Honestly, pretty good for getting a permanent injunction against future harassment. Maybe 50-50 on getting damages awarded. The HOA will argue they acted in good faith based on reasonable interpretation of the easement agreement. And the easement termination, Pete sighed. Owen, I included it in our filing as a potential remedy, but I have to be straight with you. It is a long shot. Judges are extremely reluctant to terminate easements that provide sole practical access. Even if we prove harassment, the judge is more likely to impose restrictions on the HOA rather than eliminate the easement entirely. But there is a chance. There is always a chance. But do not get your hopes up, and consider whether you actually want that outcome. Terminating the easement would create a lot of hardship for people who did nothing wrong. I thought about that all night. Did I actually want to cut off access to Shadow Pine Estates? Part of me, the angry part that was tired of being harassed, said yes. But another part, the part that remembered bringing Martha Donnelly's apple pie, felt conflicted. The hearing was more formal than the preliminary session. Judge Matthews had reviewed all the submitted documents and seemed prepared for a thorough examination of the issues. Both sides presented their cases in detail. Pete was excellent. He methodically walked through every piece of evidence, building a clear picture of HOA harassment. He presented the timeline showing how the towing incidents began shortly after I refused to renegotiate. He showed the photographs proving my equipment was properly positioned. He even played a recording I had made of my second phone conversation with Brenda, where she essentially admitted the towings were about leverage. Gregory Pierce fought back hard. He presented the HOA's photos, which I had to admit were cleverly taken to make the equipment positioning look questionable. He brought in an expert witness, some civil engineer from Bozeman, who testified that the equipment could have posed safety concerns. He argued that HOA boards have wide latitude to enforce community standards. Then Brenda herself took the stand. Pierce walked her through a series of questions about HOA responsibilities and her concerns about my logging operation. She was poised and articulate, painting herself as a concerned community leader trying to balance resident interests. When Pete cross-examined her, things got interesting. Miss Garrison, is it true that you sent Mr. Quill a letter in May of this year requesting renegotiation of the easement agreement? Yes, We felt the agreement was outdated, and Mr. Quill declined to renegotiate. Correct, he did. How did you feel about that? I was disappointed but understood it was his right. Did you consider pursuing legal action to force a renegotiation? We explored our options. And what did you conclude? Brenda hesitated. We concluded that the existing agreement was legally binding and we could not force changes without Mr. Quill's consent. So you gave up on the idea of renegotiating. We tabled it for the time being. Miss Garrison, in your phone conversation with Mr. Quill on October 18th, did you or did you not say, and I quote, "Perhaps next time you will be more considerate about where you park"? Was that not an implicit threat that you would continue having vehicles towed if Mr. Quill did not become more cooperative? I was simply encouraging proper parking practices. By having his legally parked equipment towed from his own property, the equipment was encroaching on the easement. Your Honor, may I approach the witness with Exhibit 14? Judge Matthews nodded. Pete walked to Brenda and handed her a large format print of one of my photographs clearly showing the equipment positioned well away from the easement boundary, with measurements overlaid. Miss Garrison, can you explain how equipment positioned 53 feet from the easement boundary constitutes encroachment? Brenda stared at the photo. I do not believe this photo accurately represents the situation at the time. Are you suggesting Mr. Quill falsified this evidence? I am saying perspective can be deceiving. The measurements were verified by a licensed surveyor. Are you suggesting the surveyor is lying? Gregory Pierce objected. Argumentative. Judge Matthews sustained the objection but looked thoughtful. Pete returned to our table. No further questions, Your Honor. The hearing lasted most of the day. By the end, everyone looked exhausted. Judge Matthews announced she would issue a written ruling within 1 week and adjourned the proceedings. I drove home feeling uncertain. Pete thought we had done well, but court proceedings were unpredictable. All I could do was wait. The ruling came 6 days later, delivered by certified mail. I sat in my living room and read it 3 times to make sure I understood. Judge Matthews had ruled in my favor on almost every point. She found that the HOA had improperly used towing regulations to harass me and interfere with legitimate business operations. She issued a permanent injunction prohibiting the HOA from having any equipment or vehicles towed from my property without first obtaining specific court approval showing genuine safety concerns. She awarded me damages covering the towing fees and lost business income, totaling just over $8,000. But the most significant part came at the end. Judge Matthews wrote that while she was not terminating the easement, she was placing it under judicial supervision. For the next 5 years, any dispute regarding the easement would be subject to immediate court review. And if the HOA engaged in any further harassment or bad faith actions, I could petition for suspension or termination with a lowered burden of proof. It was better than I had hoped. I called Pete immediately. You see what she did? Pete sounded excited. She essentially put the HOA on probation. If they mess with you again, termination becomes a real option. It is brilliant. So I am protected completely, and they owe you money. I will send them a demand letter for payment of damages. If they do not pay within 30 days, we can pursue collection. Over the next few weeks, things settled into an uneasy peace. The HOA paid the damages without protest, probably on advice of their lawyer. Brenda did not call or come by. Shadow Pine Estates went quiet. Then in early December I got a call from Paul Hendricks, the resident who had sympathized with me before. Owen, thought you would want to know. Brenda resigned as HOA president last night. Really? What happened? Combination of things. The legal fees from fighting you were significant, and a lot of residents were angry about it. Then, when word got out about the judge's ruling and the money we had to pay, there was a special meeting. She was facing a vote of no confidence, so she resigned instead. Who is taking over? Interim president is a guy named Marcus Webb. He is retired, was a civil engineer before. He's practical and reasonable. I think you will find him a lot easier to work with than Brenda. That is good to hear. Also, between you and me, I heard Brenda is putting her house up for sale. Apparently, the whole thing has been stressful, and her husband wants to move back to Seattle. After hanging up, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Satisfaction that justice had prevailed, but also something like sadness. It had not needed to escalate this way. If Brenda had just been reasonable from the start, none of this would have happened. In January, Marcus Webb called me. "Owen, this is Marcus Webb, the new president of the Shadow Pine HOA. I was hoping we could meet and talk about moving forward." We met at a coffee shop in Missoula. Marcus was in his late 60s, with white hair and a friendly, weathered face. He struck me immediately as someone grounded in reality. "Owen, I want to start by apologizing for the situation with my predecessor. I reviewed all the correspondence and legal filings. The HOA was out of line, and I am sorry you had to deal with that." "I appreciate that, Marcus. I want to establish a better working relationship. The easement agreement as it stands is fair. We have no interest in renegotiating or causing you problems. Our residents just want reliable road access, and we understand that your logging operations are part of living in timber country. That is all I have ever wanted, to run my business and be good neighbors. Then I think we can make that work. I have a proposal. What if we formalized a communication protocol? Anytime you are planning harvest operations, you give the HOA advance notice, just so residents know to expect truck traffic and activity. And if we ever have legitimate concerns, we bring them to you directly before taking any action. Does that seem reasonable? More than reasonable. That sounds like how neighbors should operate. We shook hands, and I felt like a weight had lifted. The conflict was truly over. Spring arrived, and with it came an unexpected development. I got a call from a number I did not recognize. A woman's voice I vaguely recognized but could not place. "Owen, this is Brenda Garrison." I almost hung up, but curiosity kept me on the line. "Brenda, I heard you moved back to Seattle." "I did. My husband and I are settled in Bellevue now. I am calling because I owe you an apology." That caught me off guard. "Okay." I have had a lot of time to reflect on what happened. I was completely out of line. I let my need to control things and have them my way override common sense and basic decency. You were just trying to run your family business, and I made your life miserable for no good reason. I appreciate you saying that. I do not expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I recognize I was wrong. That whole situation, losing the board presidency, having to sell the house and move, it was humbling. I needed to be humbled. For what it is worth, I do not hold grudges. You made mistakes, but you are acknowledging them. That takes courage. Thank you. I hope the new HOA leadership works out better for everyone. Goodbye, Owen. Goodbye, Brenda. After hanging up, I sat for a while thinking about the whole saga. It had started with a simple disagreement and escalated into something that consumed months of my life and cost everyone involved money, time, and stress. But in the end, reason had prevailed. The legal system worked. The community corrected itself by removing bad leadership. And I learned something important. Leverage goes both ways. The HOA had thought they could pressure me because the easement gave them power. They forgot that I held power too, in the form of that very same easement. When they pushed me, I pushed back, and it turned out I had more leverage than they anticipated. Fall came around again, time for another harvest. This time, everything went smoothly. Marcus Webb sent me an email thanking me for the advance notice and wishing us good weather. Residents waved as they passed my work sites. A few even stopped to ask questions about sustainable forestry, genuinely interested in what we were doing. One afternoon in October, almost exactly a year after the towing incidents, I was supervising a loader when a vehicle pulled up. It was a silver Subaru I did not recognize. A woman in her 30s got out wearing practical outdoor clothing. "Are you Owen Quill?" she asked. "That is me. I am Teresa Graves. I just bought the Garrison property in Shadow Pine Estates. I wanted to introduce myself and thank you." "Thank me for what?" "My husband and I moved here from Portland. We wanted to live in a real mountain community with real mountain industries. When our realtor told us about your logging operation and the history of the property, it actually made us more interested, not less. The fact that you run a sustainable forestry business in cooperation with the community is exactly what we were looking for." I smiled. "Well, welcome to the neighborhood, Teresa. I think you will find things are pretty peaceful these days." "That is what I hear. If you ever need anything, or if there is ever a way we can support your business, please let me know. We believe in good neighbors." After she left, I thought about how much had changed in a year. The conflict with the HOA had been exhausting and stressful, but it had also forced everyone to clarify what mattered: property rights, mutual respect, fair dealing. These were not complicated principles, but they required people willing to honor them. That evening, I drove out to the northern edge of my property where you can see for miles across the valley. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and purple. The forest around me was healthy and thriving, a testament to 3 generations of careful stewardship. Somewhere behind me, the lights of Shadow Pine Estates were starting to come on, families settling in for the evening in their mountain homes. The easement road stretched between us, a physical and legal connection that made both our lives possible. They needed it for access. I needed it for business. It was a perfect example of how interconnected we all were, how cooperation served everyone better than conflict. My phone buzzed with a text from Rick. "Boss, weather forecast looking good for next week. Ready to finish strong," I texted back. "Ready, see you Monday." I stood there a while longer, watching the light fade and the stars emerge. The mountain was quiet except for the wind in the pines. This was my home, my livelihood, my heritage. I had defended it when necessary, and I would do so again if required. But I hoped it would not be necessary. I hoped the lessons learned over the past year would stick, for everyone involved. The towing incident had been a crisis, but crises can be clarifying. They force you to understand what you value and what you are willing to fight for. They reveal character, both good and bad. They test whether people will act with integrity or give in to pettiness. In the end, integrity had won. The legal system, for all its flaws, had protected property rights and punished bad faith actions. The community, when given accurate information, had made good choices. And I had learned that standing up for yourself, while uncomfortable, was sometimes necessary. As I drove home that night, I thought about my father and grandfather. They had built this business through hard work and fair dealing. They had made agreements and honored them. They had been good stewards of the land and good neighbors to those around them. I had tried to follow their example, even when tested. The next morning, I woke early and drove to the work site. The crew was already there, preparing equipment for the day's work. The air was crisp and cold, perfect logging weather. I could hear the sound of saws and machinery starting up, the familiar rhythm of work I had known my whole life. Marcus Webb's pickup drove past on the easement road, heading toward the highway. He waved and I waved back. Just neighbors going about their days, sharing a road, sharing a mountain, making it work through mutual respect and clear communication. That is what it came down to, really. Not complicated legal theories or power struggles or who had leverage over whom. Just people choosing to treat each other decently, to honor agreements, to solve problems through dialogue rather than escalation. The HOA had forgotten that for a while, blinded by a leader who valued control over cooperation. But they had remembered eventually, and that gave me hope. Not just for Shadow Pine Estates, but for every community navigating the balance between individual rights and collective interests. My logging operation continued, year after year, harvest after harvest. The forest remained healthy. The community remained stable. The road stayed open, connecting us all to the wider world while preserving our mountain sanctuary. Sometimes I would see new residents driving past, people who had no idea of the conflict that had once threatened to sever this vital connection. They just saw a well-maintained road through beautiful forest land, never knowing how close it had come to disappearing. That was fine with me. Some stories do not need to be constantly retold. Some lessons, once learned, can simply be lived rather than remembered. But I kept the judge's ruling in a file in my office, just in case. A reminder of what had been fought for and won. A reminder that rights matter and that defending them, while difficult, is sometimes necessary. The easement remained in place, serving everyone as it had for decades. The HOA operated under competent, reasonable leadership. My business thrived. The mountain endured, patient and permanent, outlasting all our temporary conflicts and concerns. And every morning when I drove out to work, I passed through that corridor between my land and theirs, that shared space that represented everything both practical and symbolic about living in community. It was just a road, really. But it was also a promise, a connection, a daily choice to make things work. That was enough. That was everything.